What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is iRate Reviews, the show where I go over a comic book, its story, its art, give you my impressions, and let you know whether it's something to go to the shop for or not. I'm going to be talking about Invincible Iron Man number 2. So this is the continuation of the story of Riri Williams as she takes over for Tony Stark as the new Iron Man, basically her own moniker of Ironheart, which she hasn't really claimed yet at this point in time. So how the book opens up is we have this giant training scene where you show Ironheart really surrounded by all the Iron Man armors that Tony Stark has left, which kind of leads you to have a few questions, but we'll get to those a little bit later. As things progress, we see Tony Stark as his AI, Ghost in the Machine kind of form, playing mentor to Riri Williams the best that he can. Basically just going around, smacking her around with his old versions of his own armor, basically demeaning, demoralizing her by telling her how poor her armor is and how bad her tactics are. He says he studied her actions in Civil War, he studied her actions against the mutant that she fought in the last issue, so there's just a lot of different things that he feels like she can improve on because she's a relative novice at this. And she just keeps taking punches and running away, which isn't quite the tactic that he was looking for. Then we bounce back in time a little bit so we can see Riri Williams and her friend. This is before the shooting that happened at the picnic, and ultimately it's just showing that her friend, she was a young girl that was interested in, like boys and things like that, which Riri couldn't really care for. She was much more interested in her technological advances as well as the ability to fly. And after that, we immediately bump back to where she's fighting Tony Stark and taking on these other armors. And it's just becoming more painfully obvious that she is clearly outclassed in terms of her technology and basically her budget, because Tony Stark almost had unlimited funds when he created his Iron Man armors, but he doesn't really have those now, so I'm not sure why he's throwing them into the trash basket so easily. And then we kind of bounce back in time again, so this is Riri confronting the situation of the death of her stepfather as well as her friend. The doctor comes out and kind of relays all this information so that way they can kind of process. Her mom is devastated simply because this is the second husband that she's lost to shootings, so that's kind of a really bad point for that. And Riri, in her fit of rage and misunderstanding, so to speak, she kind of busts through the entire hospital, goes and confronts the body of her dead friend, which is really a devastating sight for her and really kind of galvanizes this idea of being a hero. She confronts the detective about this fact. She's just like, why was I still alive? And ultimately, on the background of the TV, she sees heroes kind of fighting amongst themselves, but also kind of saving the day. That's the real important fact that she takes away from that. As we get back to the training montage between Tony Stark's AI-controlled Iron Man armors and Riri Williams, we see her, rabbiting again. She's running, and he's like, that is not a tactic. And ultimately, there's some kind of funny banter between those things, like, for the love of God, except she's actually calling out Thor. It's just like she doesn't really like his attitude, she doesn't like his personality, especially when he's kind of being this very forthright person that's just basically saying, you're terrible at this and I'm trying to make you better. And she's like, I don't need your help, as she flies away. But you know what she does? She does implant a virus into the Iron Man armors, which causes them to come crashing down into the water over which they were fighting. This does lead to another problem that I have with this book, but I am going to get to that in a little bit. The real last few pages are really covering the resurgence of Tomo. And if you remember, Tomo's an Inhuman that has the ability to control any kind of technology. And she was confronting Iron Man and War Machine before this whole Civil War II thing started. And she is back on the board and ready to destroy this new Iron Man character. So what did we really get from Invincible Iron Man number 2? Not a whole heck of a lot. Brian Michael Bendis actually doubles down on the backstory of Riri Williams and kind of goes whole hog into providing this really somber and sorrowful backstory. He really emphasizes the fact that she lost her best friend, how she lost her best friend, as well as, how that impacted her and her resolve to become this Ironheart character. And with a issue just really presenting all of that information just like a month ago, I don't really think that it was super necessary. And then as far as the training aspect of this goes, I feel like it's not necessarily productive to be doing these things, because Tony Stark is just like, hey, my armors make yours look like they're made out of like styrofoam and rubber cement. And it's like, yeah, that's really true. Why don't you help her build a new armor, Tony? Why don't you just take apart, 3 or 4 of those Iron Man armors, build up a new one, and make sure that everything's good to go? Maybe then we'd get the suit that we see on the cover of every single book, and not the original Ironheart Mark I armor. Because that would be much more productive than, taking like 10, 15 of your old Iron Man suits and kind of fighting against her. I mean, it's showing a conflict against various kind of individuals and group fighting and stuff like that, and it's kind of providing her with real life or death situations, but it's not necessarily the same kind of thing is like, all right, cool, so she's got this armor, what can we do to improve it? Why don't we emphasize the technology base? Why don't we show like a witty back and forth between like the artificial intelligence version of Tony Stark and Riri? So why don't we play their intelligences off each other? You know, he has an idea, she has an idea, and then ultimately her idea is better. Showing that she is got a very solid thought process, and she would have come to these conclusions on her own if she'd only had the time and the resources. Make her a more intelligent character versus just somebody that's kind of getting by on being like resourceful. This issue feels a little bit directionless. It's just treading water in the same space that we were in issue number 1, other than the introduction of Tomo, or the reintroduction of Tomo as a possible antagonist coming up in the next few issues. So it's just one of those things where I don't necessarily have the same kind of feeling that I did about Invincible Iron Man number 1, because this didn't really give me much beyond that. It's just like, oh, so where's the story going to go other than retreading the same things? Obviously, it's going to go someplace. However, I don't necessarily know what place it's going to go, and it doesn't really give me a solid idea where it wants to head. Invincible Iron Man number 2 doesn't really do enough to progress the Riri Williams character for me, but that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to be off the book anytime soon. I'm going to give it at least the first story arc so that way Brian Michael Bendis can continue to develop the character, which is the most important thing. I just hope that he takes a little bit bigger steps than what he did in this issue. Overall, Invincible Iron Man number 2 is good, but not quite the greatness that you need when introducing a character like this. So that's my review of Invincible Iron Man number 2, but I want to know what you guys think too, so hit me up in the comments down below and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe right there to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.